Good afternoon, all. My name is Thomas Wangi. I'm the PhD candidate from the Australian National University. I'm doing my PhD in economics, and I recently submitted my thesis, so I just returned back to PNG, and yesterday I traveled in from Port Moresby. And back at home, I'm the research fellow with the National Research Institute. Maybe to be back here again. I think this is my second time to attend this the Pacific updates. I'm happy to be back, but I've attended so many PNG updates back at home. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to chair this panel. So this is a very important panel that we have. It's on foreign aid. So it is, of course, one of the interesting topics when it comes to the Pacific region. So here we have three interesting speakers who will be speaking on different areas of aid. And they're actually from different institutions. So speak about how they see or how they think of foreign aid, especially the Pacific region. So today, without any ado, I'm gonna welcome, just like the other presentation. So each speaker will have 20 minutes each, and the last 30 minutes we'll give it for questions. So with that, I will introduce the first speaker. Our number one speaker for today is Ryan Duke, who is the research associate with the Law Institute. Law Institute is, of course, one of the institutes that do a lot of work in research. So he's gonna talk to us today on the Pacific Islands Aid Efficiency Index. So with that, I welcome you, Ryan.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Thomas, for the introduction. My name is Riley Duke, not Ryan, close, but almost. I'm a research associate at the Lowy Institute, and I'll be speaking to you today about the Pacific Islands Aid Efficiency Index. Thank you all for being here, and a big thank you to ANU and USP for hosting this event and giving me the opportunity to speak on this panel alongside Melissa and Madeline. So this is an outline of what I'll run through today. I'm first going to explain the context and the drivers behind this project, and then I'll talk through our methodology and finally share some of the preliminary results. To give you the elevator pitch of what I'm discussing today, we've been working on an index, a multidimensional scoring system that assesses the quality of a donor's aid projects in the Pacific. The main output of this research is a set of scores that can be used to rank and compare the efficiency of the aid dispersed by the region's bilateral and multilateral partners. So that's the short of the project. I'll now go into some of the context behind the index. So the Pacific is, by most measures, the most aid-dependent region in the world. On average, foreign aid flows account for 1/5 of the national income of Pacific Island nations. And across the region, foreign aid plays a crucial role in supporting government expenditure, funding development programs, and helping the region respond to economic shocks. Despite this persistent and growing volume of aid in the Pacific, the region has unfortunately seen limited economic growth over the past 2 decades. On its current trajectory, the Pacific looks likely to miss close to 80% of its 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And it's this dynamic, the pairing of low growth and slow development progress in the presence of record levels of foreign aid, that raise questions over the effectiveness and efficiency of the foreign aid in the Pacific. So the first of these topics, studies into aid effectiveness, largely focus on aid recipients and the country-level dynamics that impact aid outcomes. Typically, these studies point to structural factors within developing countries that dampen the effectiveness of aid. For the Pacific, invariably, we see a focus on the region's small and highly dispersed populations, the limited capacity of its island states to develop economies of scale, and its high and growing exposure to natural disasters. While these studies are valuable for understanding the lower effectiveness in aid in the region, They offer a narrow set of tools for policymakers to improve aid outcomes. This is where aid efficiency comes in. Aid efficiency studies examine the quality of foreign aid, focusing on the donor side of the equation, examining the efficiency with which aid donors direct and implement their development finance. Aid efficiency studies capture a variety of allocative and technical factors, including everything from a donor's use of recipient country systems and labor, to the volatility of their aid flows, their administrative costs, and how much they follow through on their commitments. While a number of studies have been conducted looking at specific aid efficiency issues, including some impactful work from the ANU's Terence Wood and Stephen Howes, to date, there has been no all-inclusive study of aid efficiency in the Pacific. Remarkably, the handful of global aid quality rankings that have been developed have excluded most of the Pacific Islands region, if not all of the region, on the basis of economic size or population size. Now, this is significant for a number of reasons. Foremost, because the Pacific, due to the importance of aid flows in its economies, is a developing region with the highest potential upside for improved quality of aid. Second to this, as the COVID-19 aid packages wash out of the region, the Pacific is likely to see a decline in aid flows in real terms. In this environment, improving the efficiency and impact of each aid dollar will become increasingly important. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, there have been consistent calls from within the region, from within Pacific governments themselves, for improved aid quality, for improved alignment, and improved coordination of aid programs. So that's the context behind the project. I'll now go into the methodology itself. So the Pacific Islands Aid Efficiency Index looks to bridge this gap. The index spans the period from 2008 to 2021 and ranks the region's 80 bilateral and multilateral development partners on the basis of their aid quality for each year. Crucially, examining the aid quality over this 14-year period means that the index can include the Pacific Aid Map's unique data set on non-traditional aid flows in the Pacific, allowing comparison between traditional donors like Australia, New Zealand, United Nations, and emerging or non-traditional donors like China and India. The index is tailored to the unique development dynamics of Pacific Island states and was developed following substantial literature reviews and external consultations. Included in the index are 12 indicators, each capturing dimensions of aid quality we believe contribute to stronger development outcomes. Each of these indicators is quantitative in nature and therefore comparable between donors for each year and also traceable over time. So the 12 indicators all contribute to scores, which are then averaged and ranked for each donors. Our goal ultimately is to produce a standardized set of ranks for Pacific aid donors that allow for fair comparison between the region's bilateral and multilateral donors. The hope is that the index will improve the measurability of aid efficiency in the Pacific and offer a tool that can help drive better aid quality and thus better aid outcomes. It's important to note that the index has not been finalized, so the results that you'll see today are still only preliminary and likely to change. We also welcome any feedback, any and all feedback that you have regarding measures or anything else to do with the project. I'll now give a brief overview of the exact components in the index and then look at the measures that we chose, and then I can discuss some preliminary results. This Monopoly card looking structure here shows the three full measures, the sort of highest brackets of what we calculate within the index. So the first and proportionally most significant component of the index is the allocated efficiency measure on the left-hand side. The aim of this measure is to evaluate how efficiently a donor allocates and disperses their development assistance throughout the Pacific. The measure is made up of 5 indicators that score a donor based on what proportion of their aid targets high-need populations, high-need sectors, and high-need issues. The first 4 indicators in the measure look at each donor's proportional development focus on poverty, climate vulnerability, good governance, and regional public goods, or global public goods as they're sometimes referred. To dig into one example, AE3, the targeting climate vulnerability indicator, looks at what percentage of a donor's funds target climate adaptation projects and what proportion of their aid is focused on the region's most climate vulnerable populations. The 5th and final part of the allocated efficiency measure is the volatility indicator, which looks at the variance in donors' aid flows into the region. This measure is based on a wide body of research that argues that highly volatile aid places a significant administrative burden on recipient governments and reduces the quality and effect of aid. This indicator, the volatility indicator, is calculated running regressions and looking at each donor's residuals, the gaps between their expected and actual aid. I probably don't have time to run into all of the indicators in detail, so I'll just jump across to technical efficiency now. So this measure, technical efficiency, looks at donors and evaluates how they choose to implement their development assistance once they've made their allocated decisions. The measure rewards donors for specializing in specific sectors or modalities. It also scores donors on their use of the multilateral system and what proportion of their aid is tied and programmable. Finally, it takes into account how much of a donor's aid budget is spent on administrative costs and how much of the country's aid commitments, its promised funds, are delivered. So to expand on a couple of these indicators in more detail, the first technical efficiency indicator is specialization by sector. And this indicator identifies and rewards donors for specializing in specific sectors, modalities, and project types, based on a view that a donor will develop expertise in delivering on specific areas and outcomes. It's calculated using an adapted version of revealed comparative advantage, which is typically used for trade advantage, but it works well in this case as well. Another example is TE5, the reliability of aid delivery indicator. And this looks at what proportion of a donor's commitments in the Pacific end up being actually dispersed. And here we're trying to reward donors that fulfill their promises and deliver on their announced projects. The last component of the index looks at what we call learning efficiency. This measure evaluates whether a donor is engaging in transparent and improvement-oriented aid delivery. Including this measure are scores for transparency and data sharing, as well as data completeness and some of the issues that my colleague Jess Collins discussed in the previous panel. So that's an overview of the components of the index and what the scores are made up of. The final thing to note is that not all indicators there of the 12 indicators are treated equally. There are weights, but the final assignment is weights of something that we're going to wait to do until after we finish our consultations. Okay. So the index offers two main outputs for analysis. The first of these involves looking at the rankings of aid donors, so how they compare to each other and what indicators particular donors perform well or poorly in. The second set of outputs focus on the bigger picture story told by the data. This involves looking at how improvement or decline has occurred in particular aid quality measures region-wide over time. So on the screen here are the top 20 ranked donors for 2021. This is just one of the 14 years in the index. And for those that can't see, I hope the text is big enough, but if not, the list is led by the World Health Organization, followed by the Adaptation Fund, the United States, the Green Climate Fund, Canada, and the Global Fund. So there are a number of interesting stories in the overall rankings for 2021. The World Health Organization tops the list with consistently high scores across the three grouping measures, and obviously consistent scores across the 14 indicators. The WHO's work, particularly during the pandemic, fits the profile of high quality aid. It's highly specialized. It targets the highest need communities in the Pacific and fulfills close to all of its project commitments. The United States ranking here is perhaps a surprise to some, especially as the United States performs quite poorly in several global aid quality measures. A few factors contribute to this, but most importantly, the United States' relationship with its Compact of Free Association states, all of which are amongst the highest in terms of climate vulnerability, means that it scores very well in those indicators. The US is also quite relatively specialized in its Pacific aid delivery. It focuses primarily on education and on some forms of infrastructure. And it also delivers a lot of its aid through budget support, which the index tends to score quite well. Now, looking down the list, there's a trend apparent in the rest of that top 20 that appears quite consistently across the full 2008 to 2021 period. That being that mid-sized multilateral aid agencies typically display the greatest aid quality. Now, while there are certainly exceptions to this rule, we see that these highly targeted agencies implement projects with greater efficiency than their bilateral counterparts based on the measures that we chose. Now, this wasn't prescribed. We didn't go into it with that assumption being the case. It's just simply what the results show. So here we're looking at rankings of the Pacific's 12 largest development partners by volume. Next to each donor on the left-hand side, you can see they're ranked within the full list of 80 donors. As we've already discussed, the United States has performed well in 2021. Here in the top three, it's followed by the Global Fund and Korea. The Global Fund is another good example of a donor that performs consistently in the index. Its hyper-focus on health, on both communicable and non-communicable diseases, means it consistently ranks at the top of its technical efficiency list. It also fulfills a very high proportion of its projects, which helps it in the technical efficiency measure. On the lower end of the preliminary rankings is the Asian Development Bank, which scores at 52nd out of the 80 donors. This is certainly a surprise to many. While the ADB scores extremely well in some parts of the index, its comparatively high allocation of funds in Fiji, Nauru, Niue, and Palau, the Pacific's higher income states or higher per capita income states, means that it ranks at the bottom of the major donors list in terms of its poverty allocation. Just marginally above the ADB is China, which scores well for its allocated efficiency, but sees its rank dragged down by technical and learning efficiency factors. China's lack of transparency regarding its aid projects heavily impacts its learning efficiency rank, and its technical efficiency rank is low because of its minimal multilateral engagement and the large gap between its commitments and disbursements. China is consistently the donor in the Pacific, with the biggest gap between project commitments and project disbursements. Australia's upper middle ranking at 27th out of 80 donors is explained by its consistent performance across most of the 12 indicators. Australia scores well for its poverty and vulnerability targeting, particularly because of its proportionally large focus on the region's poorest communities, notably Papua New Guinea. Australia's lower ranks, the dragging down of its ranks, particularly come from a lack of sectoral specialization and because of its comparatively low level of multilateral engagement. So shifting now to two of the bigger picture results from the index. So this chart here compares the performance of the Pacific's traditional versus non-traditional bilateral donors for just one of the 12 indicators, that being volatility. What the data shows is that over the 2008 to 2021 period, aid disbursements from the region's traditional donors like Australia and New Zealand have been significantly less volatile than disbursements from emerging donors like China and India. It's important to note here that we've stripped out emergency and humanitarian funds from the volatility measure, as we don't want donors given low ranks or poor performance marks based on responding to crises like COVID-19 or cyclones or extreme weather events. All right. So finally here, this scatter plot compares the allocative efficiency and technical efficiency scores for all donors over the past 5 years. What we see here is that the multilateral donors coded in red score significantly better than bilateral donors in the technical efficiency measure. And conversely, on average, bilateral donors score slightly higher in the allocative efficiency measure than their multilateral counterparts. These results are just a small fraction of what will be released in the full 14-year version of the index later this year. So this last slide here just covers off what's next. So we've got additional project consultations in the coming months before the index is finalized and it goes live as part of an interactive alongside the Pacific Aid Map. That's it. Thank you for listening to my presentation. As I said earlier, this index is still a work in progress. So please send any feedback you have, any thoughts at all. Everything will be welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan, for sharing your information on how much aid that the Pacific region actually get from the source that Justin mentioned. So our second speaker is Madeline Flynn. She is the senior analyst with the Development Intelligence Lab. She will be sharing us with some of the critical issues facing the Indo-Pacific international development strategies in shifting the environment. So with that, let's welcome Madeline.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Madeline Flynn, and I'm a senior analyst at the Development Intelligence Lab, which is a think tank in Canberra that analyses Australia's engagement in the region of development. And today I want to put three propositions to you. So first, I want to take you behind the scenes of what we've been seeing as a bit of a reset in Canberra on how Australia engages with the region through its development cooperation. And Second, with this in mind, I want to give you an idea of what's top of mind for over 100 development experts from across the region based on the research. And third, I want to put it to you that our sense is that right now, the Pacific is in the driving seat as Australia charts its new course for its development support over the coming years. And I'll give you a bit of a sense of what we think this could look like. So diving into the first proposition, I'm going to take you from where we are now back over into the Canberra bubble temporarily to give you a picture of what we're seeing. Now, we all know that the political rhetoric from Australia on how it engages with the Pacific is not something new. It's not just sprung up. The Pacific Step Up was first fruited by our Prime Minister back in 2016, and it was formalised the following year. And actually, it's a Prime Minister from 2008 that claims to be the OG of this one. So I'm going to put him in there. And then it was our last Prime Minister who really, really leaned into this Pacific family. Just so he can go in there. But what we've been observing is that since our last election last year and with this new government, the rhetoric on how we engage with the Pacific has both increased and it's changed. So here's the new game. Now, this change, it may not be reflected in a budget yet. It's yet to be tested on delivery, but it does indicate that a reset in our development relationships with the Pacific is definitely upward. So from the Prime Minister, it's a new path of friendship, of mateship, common accord. It's a bond between equals. From our Foreign Minister, most recently, she said it's about partners, not patriots. And from our Development Minister, he's saying that Pacific priorities are at the forefront of our engagement. And then, of course, there's all the travel. I would say extremely rare in Australian leadership to give such immediate and prominent priority to foreign affairs in general, let alone the Pacific engagement we've been seeing in the way that they have. And we've also been seeing that regional leaders are noticing this. They are noticing this reset. Not everyone's commenting on it, but there have been comments from people like the former Fifth Secretary, the Samoan Prime Minister, saying that this change is notable. So this brings me to last October, because for the first time in a good decade, Australia has been putting pen to paper on the new development policy. And so my colleagues at the lab and we sat down with the team inside government tasked with doing it, that's them, and we asked them, what are the critical issues you're facing in writing this new policy? What are you stuck on? And what are the tricky things that you need to know? Now at the lab, we believe that the most effective development policy should start with the insights and the intelligence of people who live and breathe and lead and deliver development. And that is those operating inside the countries that we seek to assist. So we took these questions from the government policy drafters and we put them to over 50 experts from across the region, the majority of the Pacific, to get their views on it. And then we also gathered a group of over 50 Australia-based experts and put the questions to them as well. Now, these are people who know the machinery of Australian government, they can speak feedback, and they have worked in the region. So we wanted to know things like, how is Australian aid perceived? What's the top thing that will influence development across the region? And what should Australia change? Just a few big issues there. So that brings me to my second point for the day. What is top of mind for experts in the region when it comes to Australia's development effort? Now, I won't take you through all the findings from all of the research because we'll be here all afternoon. But I do want to take you through just a few high-level findings from our regional experts, and then also compare that to what the Australia-based experts think. the first one here, self-perception is really hard. And so we asked our regional experts how they would describe Australian aid and development. Now, as expected, there was a mix of positive and negative. So on the good side, everyone was in pretty much broad agreement that Australia is one of the key partners for development in the region. They said Australia was best known for its support in sectoral areas like gender, education, scholarships. And then there was our disaster response. So they said, yep, always there in times of disaster and emergency. So I would say no real surprises there. But what was far more interesting was the not so good. We heard that Australian development always, quote, aligns to Australia's political interests, which may not necessarily be in the national or community interests. A few experts mentioned that Australia is generally, quote, well-meaning, but sometimes misguided or opportunistic. And one expert really gave us the taste of reality. They said they describe Australian aid and development as, quote, irrelevant. So there's a little taster. But we also wanted to test how these regional experts see Australia against what the Australian experts think are the strengths of the program. So when we were with our Australian experts, we said to them, okay, what are the strengths of the program? And this is a bit of the list that they gave us. And so then we took this list and we gave it to our regional expert. And we said, okay, looking at this, all the things we think we're really good at, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good are we at these things? And here's what they said. So pretty positive on gender and diversity, on long-term engagement and quality. We start to dip a little bit at reliability and flexibility, and we're barely a pass at cooperating effectively. So the takeaway from this, I think there are some good things. I think Australia does try to go hard on quality, although we're seeing how that's landing. I think our efforts in certain sectoral areas that we've been focusing on really hard are being noticed, things like gender and disaster response. But on the other hand, what we were hearing is that the way that Australia is delivering its program isn't landing. And a lot of experiences described were that of a transactional or a misguided or opportunistic Australia. And we even heard calls from some regional experts for Australia to just be more honest in its motivations, be those commercial, geopolitical, or otherwise. So the next thing we wanted to know is getting into what will influence development. So at the lab, we know that every nation's development is dictated first and foremost by its own people and the unique barriers to development that that nation faces. But let's be honest, sometimes development assistance can be just as much about what Australia or other partners can or want to provide. So we asked the regional experts, what would influence their country's development? And here are the top factors that came out. And what you can see here is that obviously governance was by far number one. Every focus group we spoke to talked at length about it. And governance captures a really broad array of things. It's things like independence of judiciaries, rule of law, strong institutions, tackling corruption, and of course, local leadership. Now, as a point of comparison, we asked our Australia-based cohort what they think the top trends that will influence development in the region are. And again, out of a good 15 to 20 things that they mentioned, they're not all captured here, governance was in the top 3, which we were a little bit surprised about. But looking at the 2, I think we're really on song with these 2 things. So the takeaway from this one, what we were hearing is that the experts are kind of sounding the alarm on something that Australia really needs to remember at every step of its development planning and execution. And that's that local systems of leadership and governance are a key determinant of development. And Australian experts are backing that up as well. So what needs to change? If we remember this, given all the rhetoric from our political leaders on this renewed partnership, we asked the regional experts what they would see and feel if Australia was being a world-class development partner. And here's what they said. So up top, by far, it's relationships. And that's a really broad category. And it touched on things like the individual interactions that they have with Australian government and our delivery partners. They were urging Australia to, quote, be less transactional and genuinely build relationships and have dialogue about development issues. They wanted a genuine partnership model built on mutual respect. They wanted Australia to, quote, see the Pacific as an equal. And they said that Australia in particular needs to be much more culturally competent when engaging with the region. But they did see potential that for Australia, if we managed to make a lot of changes that they were asking for, that there was potential there for Australia to become a much more trusted ally and, quote, a member of the Pacific family. Now, we know it's really easy for a lot of experts to say, yep, more of this, please, more of that, please. But it's really hard to pick just one thing. So we asked our regional experts if there was one thing they would change about Australia's approach to aid and development, what would it be? And overwhelmingly, again, it's locally led development, it's decolonisation, and it's relationship. Now, as a quick point of comparison to our Australia-based cohort, we asked them a similar question on partnership. We said to them, what can Australia do to realise the government's commitment to genuine partnerships? And again, improving partner involvement and localisation efforts was up top. I'll note that was very closely second, just behind improving DFAT capability. But when you dive into the responses, it was improving DFAT capability to deliver a more locally led development program. So we're all on side here. So the takeaway from this one, I think it's really clear that there is a demand and an expectation for drastic change in Australia's approach to cultivating development relationships, and of course, for delivering a much more locally led development program. I also think it's really fascinating to see that when faced with a choice, the bulk of our experts indicated that they would change more about how Australia does development rather than what it does. So where to from here? This brings me to my third and final point. And that is that we're seeing, well, we think we're seeing a shift in imagination in Canberra. And we believe that the Pacific holds really serious power in this moment right now. And the evidence that we're seeing for this is actually in the terms of reference for the new development policy. Pacific countries have been saying for decades that the old construction of aid projects is not the development paradigm that they want from partners in Australia or elsewhere. And for a long time, we've had calls for a much more sophisticated partnership with Australia that brings our countries together, more united in pursuit of social and economic development. So we've heard calls consistently for things like accessing Australia's education system, for employment opportunities, for visa regulations, visa changes, for Australia to promote trade with your nations, tourism, cultural exchange, and so on. And we've been hearing that a lot of these things are just as important as a lot of grant-funded projects. But today, I think Australia has persisted in thinking about our development assistance in slightly more simple terms around our official development assistance money. But you can see here, my government saying now that they're looking more at connection, at collective action on things like climate change, on effective states. And I think we're starting to see a common understanding now between these groups that the how is just as, if not more important than the what. Now, this new development policy, it's ready to go. It's about to be released. And we are going to be moving from the what to the how, from policy to implementation. And we know from all of this research and all of these discussions that we've been having is that this is where we really need to see these changes. And what we're observing at the lab is that policymakers in Canberra, they're not looking to their traditional Australian development echo chamber to guide this. They are looking to the region for ideas and to be influenced. And in briefings with over 500 people on this research, the vast majority of policymakers always start the conversation with, okay, but tell me what the regional experts said and give me a list of ideas. So this is where their heads are at, and this is what they're watching for. So very quickly, I will put to you again my 3 propositions. Australia is having a development reset. I don't think it will be drastic. It's yet to be tested, but I do believe that change is happening. And central to this reset is an ambition to be a better informed partner in the Pacific. And that's what we've been hearing from our regional experts. It's the how and the what. And they've given us some starting and some ideas. But I would put to everyone here in this room, if this is something you've got ideas on, the opportunity and the scope, the specific insights to create change has never been there. Now, of course, it is not the Pacific's responsibility to solve Canberra's policy conundrums. But I do think that if Pacific experts and thought leaders believe that they can influence their own community's development by influencing Canberra, now's the time to come on that. And as for what Australia can change, we've got our checklist from all of our experts ready. And we want to help people add to it because we see our role as a think tank as linking insights from the region directly into hands of decision makers in Australia. And that's what we'll be facilitating at the lab over the next year as the policy is rolled out. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for those very interesting views, especially development views from the political perspective. So with that, I would like to call on the final and the third speaker, and that is Melissa Conley, and she is the Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Development Diplomacy and Defense Dialogue. So, welcome.
Is this a fantastic panel or what? I am very lucky that I've been put in this room. So can I thank the organisers very much, ANU and particularly USP, for the chance to be here. These days, I live on a mountain about 3.5 hours from the closest sea. And I didn't realise till I came as a guest, but there's been a hole in my heart where that sea has been, and it's been beautiful to be able to be here over the last few days. It reminds me just so much of the beauty and the potential of this great blue Pacific continent. So thank you so much for allowing us to be here. So in terms of who I am and where I'm from, some of you might know me from my time at the Australian Institute of International Affairs. I was there for 13 years. But I went from the oldest think tank in Australia to the youngest, even younger than you, I think, maybe. We were set up as an initiative to improve Australian policymaking by bringing together the different arms of statecraft, by getting defence, development, diplomacy, and other things that don't start with D, like trade and economics and law, all together to try to improve the quality of what we do. And while you may not know me so much, you probably know some of the people that got involved with AP4D. We've got a great group of people who are behind it, who think that this is all about how can Australia improve the quality of our statecraft and how we can do that well. So over the last 2 years with that new, we've been working on a range of topics. We've focused a lot on the Pacific, also on Southeast Asia. So in our first year, our trial year as a scrappy little startup with some seed funding, we did 5 papers looking at Australia's shared future with the Pacific. And then more recently, we've done ones on fishing, Timor-Leste, on WPS in the Pacific. And I've put quite a few of the papers over in that corner. So if you are interested in looking at them in any more detail, do grab them before they all go at the end. We've been absolutely delighted that so many experts from the region have got involved. And I think the same as Maddie, that we are so fortunate that experts from the region see some benefit in trying to influence policymaking in Canberra and are prepared to share their time with us. And that's what we're all about. We're all about being a platform for non-government expertise to find its way into Australian policymaking. What I think I've been blown away by is how receptive Australian policymakers have been to this. That's sort of, I suppose, the proof that we weren't sure was there. And I think Maddie's right that there is a sort of moment, there's a receptivity. So the sort of things that are coming out of our papers, we're actually getting a hearing from both sides of politics, from each of the different parts of the international policy community. So the paper I want to tell you about now is the one we're currently working on, not finished. And so this is my opportunity to ask you to help shape it. And I'm really, really keen on getting your views. I don't think what I've got to say is nearly as interesting as what you've got to say. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that. So I'm looking specifically at infrastructure, which you might see as part of foreign aid or you might see as something else. I'm going to leave that in people's mind. But it certainly is a defence development diplomacy issue that as we've been looking at. So the way we work is we go through a long consultation process. Depending upon the papers, sometimes there'll be a really strong regional component. A Timor-Leste paper with equal consultations in both countries. In this case, we've mainly focused on the Australian experts because we're covering all of Southeast Asia and Pacific. And so what you're going to see here is what those people in Australia who've been working on it most have been seeing. Again, you will probably know some of those names there and some of those organisations that have been involved in the consultations to date. And you can probably get a sense there that we deliberately are bringing together people from the different areas, from development, diplomacy, defence, from trade and economics, etc. And then a few very kind people put their hands up to spend a lot of time with us to try to really go deep into the issues. And so they met for usually 4 or 5 times over the course of consultation period, working on the draft. So I'm not going to really go through all of it. I'm going to focus on the bits that I think are of most interest, but you can get a sense this is what the eventual paper will look like. The information we've got on the status quo snapshot is quite interesting because Australia contributes to infrastructure in so many different ways that it's actually hard to keep track of them all and work out how they work. So we have at least done some data collection on that, not as much as my esteemed colleagues, but some on that. I don't think there's any question really about the why it matters, whichever direction you see it from. Whether you see it from Australia's perspective as, being, concerned with, intimately caring about the growth and prosperity of the region. But clearly there are huge infrastructure gaps and we're aware of them. We're also aware of what infrastructure funding is doing to strategic competition in the region. So if you put that all together, it's a topic that's really high on the agenda in the way that policymakers are thinking about it in Canberra. What's interesting, though, is that if you drill down a little bit, the different communities see it very differently. So not surprisingly, development people are all about what is this doing that meets the needs of our countries and communities? How is it helping actually achieve development outcomes? And they can be very concerned about things that they see as essentially more geostrategic. Which may or may not have the sort of development outcomes you'd expect. They're very worried about the official development assistance money that gets put into infrastructure when possibly it could be put somewhere else. From a diplomacy side, there's a lot of focus on influence. What does this mean? Influence of elites, because that's often how diplomats think about the world. What does it mean for Australia's relationships if other parties are putting infrastructure into the region? What happens if our infrastructure goes bad? What does that do to our reputation? And then from the defence side, they see a lot of infrastructure as, essentially dual use, as physical assets that are a security enabler. They worry about what it means for security relationships in the region and see this as a prime defence issue. So I don't think Australia actually does have a consensus view on infrastructure yet. I think we have quite a fractured idea of why we're in infrastructure and what we're trying to do with it. And I'm assuming that probably plays out in us being quite confused in the way that we interact with the region on infrastructure issues. Now, I probably won't go through this much because I do want to, as I say, spend as much time as I can hearing your views. But I think following from what I just said, you'd see that one of the big problems is we don't have a clear idea of what success looks like. If you have quite different criteria for how you're judging the aims of the project, you're going to have quite different criteria for what success looks like. We're also conscious that we're just not that big a donor in infrastructure terms. Infrastructure is massively, massively expensive. And while we may be a big aid donor, that doesn't translate into the sort of money that makes you a big infrastructure partner. We're concerned, though, at the same time that private investment is going to be low in a lot of areas. If you're doing things on an entirely market-based system, that can be very difficult, mobilising that money. And also concerned about things that, infrastructure spend might do for governance, which Maddie said was such an important area. What it might do for, corruption, what it might do for, for labour, for example, when we're taking so much labour from the region. So what I've got and what I really want to spend my time on is the first 50 of you who walked in were lucky enough to get a handout. For everybody else, it's on screen. This is what we've generated from that, 5 months of work of talking to Australian experts on infrastructure about what some guiding principles might be. In this case, I think it's still a debate in Australia that's quite, fractious. And trying to come up with some principles that people who are involved in infrastructure, wherever they are, if they're in defence infrastructure, if they're using development assistance, if it's something more geostrategic, to actually think through what they're doing. So in there, you'll see there are 10 we've identified in terms of the sort of policy level. And then there's another 10 we've identified in terms of the sort of implementation level. And what I'm really, really interested in getting is people's views on it. So I actually deliberately asked Thomas to put me last, thank you. So I could essentially just go straight into that. I'm not very interested in questions to me because I don't think I'm very interesting. I think you're very interesting and I'd like your views on this. So I'm going to encourage people. I know the inclination in an after lunch session is to just sit there and listen. But what we're all about is taking this and bringing it back to Canberra. So if there are things that annoy you about the way that Australia does its infrastructure, if there are things where you're just confused and don't understand why we do it, please bring your voice out, tell me something, let me take it back and see if I can try and do my best to convey that to the folks back in Canada. So with Thomas's indulgence, if we're happy, I'd be happy to go straight into questions from this and get people to start telling their views. Everyone think of a view.
Okay, thank you, the three presenters. Now it's the question and answer session, so you're gonna take the seats there. And for those who have any questions or things that you really want to understand or know further about, you can ask our three presenters. So the guys will come around with the speakers so you can ask them. And especially for, I think, yes, Malaysia. She's asking for further views that she wants to take back to Canberra. So if you have some views for her, you can also make some comments. So it's a Q&A session starts now. I think we have Jessica there. You can ask.
Thank you. Just following. Thank you so much for the presentation today. I really enjoyed them. My question is to Nelly. I was just wondering about the scale from 1 to 10 that first set of results in the chart. Did you separate it out so you have the regional cohort is different from the Australian cohort? And my second question, sort of following on from that, was the next few ones that sort of came up to show that the similar question for the thing you were asking about, we had similar, sorry, slightly different questions for each cohort, and I was just wondering why that was. Yeah. So, yeah, on the first one for the scale, that was another reason for the questions are
Okay, we have another question here from Nellis.
I think it's a double skill on the
So the WTO is included. It's just the snapshot, mostly because I couldn't fit it on the screen. I just had the top 20 in that first slide. But the WTO, the second set of slides, which is the top 20 in terms of volume, World Trade Organization wouldn't even be in maybe the top 30 in terms of volume in the region. So it's simply that it wasn't there. In terms of its performance from memory from the preliminary results, the WTO tends to do quite well in terms of technical efficiency because it's quite specialized, but its aid in the region doesn't score particularly well under transparency because its information sharing, which is very strong. And then in terms of its allocated efficiency, it doesn't operate region-wide. It tends to focus on the regions with larger economies, so it tends to score quite poorly for that. But don't quote me on its exact rank, it's probably lower middle. And it's pretty mixed across the three different sectors. So for the WTO, like all donors, gets treatment for all, so it's measured in all 12 indicators. So the way the index works is for every single donor, all 80, as long as they've dispersed money in a particular year, they'll be ranked in those years. So the WTO's projects, trade openness projects, stuff like that, they're all included for every single indicator that we have.
Okay, we have one more question at the back.
Hi, my name is Alan. Firstly, thanks, Madeline, Melissa, and Riley for your presentations. Lots of interesting stuff, and I've been trying to organize my thoughts in order to make some comment and put some questions through. So I guess, firstly, I guess on Madeline, on your presentation, I think it's not surprising seeing the feedback that has come through, highlighting the need for putting more effort into governance, locally led development, decolonization. And these are things, I guess, that we've observed over the years. And as someone who used to work with AusAid's Pacific Leadership Program before it became DFAT and what can, we saw the importance of the need to have Pacific Island leadership address these issues, which are often around governance. And I guess stepping back and looking at all three presentations, you know, how do we get to open up that space to allow for a lot of the data that you're sharing, both in terms of developing an aid efficiency tool, in terms of undertaking those surveys, to have that feedback be heard directly by the Australian government without needing to be interpreted through the Lowy Institute or through ANU? How do partners like you act as a basically as a channel to open up so the Pacific voice comes through to say exactly the things that you found out, but in a sense, you be able to then interpret and voice on our behalf. So, you know, I think there's potential for things like an aid efficiency tool that is developed by Pacific Islanders that uses our own measures of what is effectiveness and what is efficiency. And, you know, I think as a tool, sorry, Riley, you know, it's great to compare apples and apples, so you can highlight against the US, but as a tool for Pacific Islanders, we need a way to be able to measure these things ourselves, and more importantly, to have that heard directly by us. And then I guess coming back to Melissa's point, you know, Riley's presentation for infrastructure, governance, and local leaders, you can't go wrong if you build those into your programs. Thank you.
That's what we like that. They work with the data and then really find some way to now the question is why I don't know. So there might be
I agree with everything you said, and sort of thank you for a really good question. I mean, one thing in terms of how the Pacific perspective plays a role in the index, the consultations and a lot of the decision making about what indicators improve, a lot of that came with Pacific voices in mind. You know, I spoke about the three key issues that helped drive the project in the first place. The third of them was that there's been an increased call from the region for more efficient aid. And so the project in a way is trying to allow for a translation between these complex data sets and something that is measurable. And you mentioned the apples for apples thing. We think that if we don't standardize everything deeply, then what gets lost in that is the country can feel that's exceptional for particular circumstances, or a donor can feel that's exceptional. And the other part of that is, you know, in terms of how this, how projects like that can benefit the region. I think part of the index also allows you to look at what is the aid quality being in terms of a recipient country, how high quality is the aid that you receive. And our hope is that that offers some bargaining tools for implementation and for localization and other factors like this for donors to use. Thank you again for the question.
I think we have a Grant at the back there, so you may ask the question.
Thanks. Grant Walton from the Development Policy Centre. I don't have the list of well, I do now, but I didn't before. So I didn't have the list, Melissa. Sorry about that. Just a couple of very quick suggestions. First of all, politicians around the region and the world are incentivized to build stuff. So maintaining that stuff, I think, is going to be important. And we've seen, I mean, I did a lot of research on the decline of the maintenance of of things they've built and reduction of their life. The second thing I would say is that Australia's got an amazing, really good infrastructure development program, but not many people know about it. And it's facilitated through money laundering. And what happens is that, like, a lot of so some regional money, some money from the Asia Pacific comes into Australia, readily flows in and builds lots of houses, mansions, around Australia, particularly in Cairns and in places like that. And I think Australia could therefore perhaps look at perhaps reducing the infrastructure built within Australia by addressing its money laundering laws, which has been criticised. Thanks. That was a bit of a cheeky comment.
We have any comments from the panel? I get a question. We have a question from here. This young man is.
All right, thank you. I just have a number of questions, but I'll try to streamline the sequence of evidence. So I just wanted to ask, right, very fascinated about the I think it is really something that I think is going to be very important, especially globally. I was curious about the good governance. How does that factor into as a very interesting way to see good governance? What is the and how is that understood? You had also mentioned that the index is not in mind. I wonder who are these people? What that what which I think is the very not to put you on the spot, but the law will also start to values with them in their own ways. So reflected by the measures what sort of just provide that balance that we have to ensure some gaps, some quality, the perception of quality on the other side of the ocean has to be very different. I've also been about local development. And I know that we have been around different stakeholders. I just want to ask you if you could share what extent I think generally this terms of delivery quality of from the Pacific business beyond the region. My last question is in the past characters that you have guessed, very influential course with figures. I wanted to share with us before we review what is the are those organizations from China and the ethnic China and the Jewish security? What is that? Is that our
So there are a number of questions there. So let's start with Riley and then go to Madeline.
So thank you for a very good set of questions. A few things in there. On the first one, in terms of governance, I'm conscious, like I'm sure you are, that there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of how we value good governance and what that means. Where the index approached governance, which is probably one of the trickiest indicators that we chose to include, we looked at support, both high-level government support and then also local governance projects. And really, we just looked at what intensity of focus is in each donor's approach to the region within each country that it focuses on. I can't really share much more than that, but I can definitely send you a data set that would make it look a lot more interesting. Sorry, maybe not less interesting, I'm not sure, but in terms of consultations, the index, once it's finalized, will be shared with all of the 14 Pacific Island countries, their governments included in the region. And we also have a number of Pacific academics that we'll contact, as well as just a lot of thought leaders and anyone else that cares to give their thoughts. The other aspect that I think it's important to note is that, you know, the other global aid quality measures that exist didn't even include the Pacific in their measures. You know, the population size or the economy size is just that didn't fit the minimum benchmark. And those are very good studies, but they don't really work in the context of the Pacific and its small island nations. And so I think, you know, elements of what we chose that were important were all focused around the unique development dynamics at play in the Pacific. And what we really wanted wasn't just a global aid quality measure that fit, you know, that we impressed on the Pacific, but was one that was made with ideas about Pacific aid quality in mind.
Jumping I was looking through sort of how but what we're the second one
Melissa, you want to add something?
Yes, I got the China question, which I had tried not to mention much because, look, honestly, I'd say there's a real variety in terms of the people who've been involved in work like this. Yes, some would be very concerned about China and geostrategic competition. So I know someone like Katie Chan at the US Study Centre, she's not sure. But then there's someone else on the group, Rita Malcolm from Save the Children, and she's interested in social infrastructure and what it means for social protection and what it means for communities in the Pacific. So I think it's a microcosm of the range of views that exist at the moment. From an AP4D perspective, we have said in every one of our papers over and over again that you can't see the Pacific as an industry at the end. You have to have a genuine partnership based on wanting to build a shared future. And I think that's a voice that helps round out the debate in Australia that's sometimes dominated by China.
We still have some time. So about 20 minutes. And any questions? Okay, let's take Ryan and then move to that side. Ryan.
So I'm Ryan, not Ryan. No, it's not Ryan. I got one sort of suggestion wearing my economist hat or monitor, taking your bait from before. So when I think about national trade as an economist, we've literally reflected the last 15, 20 years. There's a really exciting direction, and we've actually like quite a while now about long-term economic development practices and public infrastructure and how. And almost the mechanism, almost all of the time, comes back to trade costs as broadly defined, whether that's commuting costs for a person to get to work, moving the good around, all those type of things. So in defining infrastructure, I would say like try and place that front and center, and also aim for precision. Don't let infrastructure mean everything and anything, because trade costs are such a huge barrier out here, and market access, and how lowering those trade costs can increase market access. So that's where it would, based on everything we know, have the most impact in terms of actual development, in my view. Then, yeah, one brief suggestion as well for an observation and a reception for Ryan, no Riley, was one nice thing I noticed. So the allocative efficiency measure, a lot of those indicators that you put on there, the reason that the ones at the top did well was because the indicators like poverty reduction and other things were measures of, is this aid actually doing development, rather than all the other things that aid nowadays does. So that's part of the reason why Australia was lower. In the review of the poverty trade, you don't see poverty anywhere these days in our review of development policy or elsewhere. Doesn't mean it's not still a problem, but that's one of the mechanical things that I think was driving that result. And then, yeah, wearing my economist hat again, we've got really precise definitions of technical efficiency and allocative efficiency. And although I haven't seen the formula, seeing those indicators and the way they're categorized, I don't think they will map really cleanly to them. So you might need to be careful on which audiences and how it is presented to who, because yeah, there's very technical definitions and formulas that are associated with both of those concepts. But that's all. Yeah.
Any response to his comments?
Thank you. That was very good feedback. So I didn't go into huge amounts of detail about the technical efficiency measures. I try and refrain from having lots of formulas up on the screen so I don't put everyone to bed. But look, the complexity down drilling into the sectoral specialization, stuff like that, and some of the efficiency measures and the Herfindahl-Hirschman index and stuff that we use, which I'm sure you're aware of, they all do play a role, but we tried to keep it a little bit high level for that. Now, in terms of the poverty comment you're absolutely right. But that poverty focus wasn't actually about sectoral focus. It wasn't about projects where the focus is on poverty. It was actually based on the distribution of per capita incomes within countries and how the aid actually targets those in terms of location. So what we were really trying to do there is, and everything's proportional, right? So the volume is completely taken out of the equation. It just looks at what donors, for the average $100 that they spend in the Pacific, how much of that lands or is focused on, as much as we can measure, on the highest need areas. And for that particular indicator, need was measured by per capita income. Thanks. Mix. So the indicator includes both. At the local level, it's a lot harder to measure. Some projects are split, but where possible, there's like a local calculation with that.
I think let's have one more question from there.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking the panelists this afternoon. I think Melissa said after lunch, it's challenging to keep everyone focused, but it's such a big topic and one that I follow very closely. Now, we started off with Ryan setting the scene about the Pacific continuing to be an aid-dependent region. And then we sort of narrowed down on how, we look at Australia's role in the Pacific. But my question is to all of you, three panelists. And I wonder if, Madeline, there was any disaggregated information from the survey that you did that sort of help us understand what the reaction was for the Pacific regarding a lot of aid going back to expats. And we talk about financing facilities and partnership. A lot of these things, one thing that stood out from your presentation was relationships and local capacities. But are we really addressing this if all the money that comes from aid goes back to the expat communities and not entrenched in the local communities. How are we addressing that? Because I think if we realistically want to address this issue, it's about changing the paradigm of development and giving it to, and I know it takes time, it's not going to happen overnight, but what is your advice on strengthening local capacities and giving local experts to lead their own programs? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, really great point. I think because of the time limitations of our research, we didn't dive into that too much. Our experts did sort of touch on the inequality and the inequity in these flows of money, as you were saying, but we didn't dive too much into it. I think on sort of moving forward and how to tackle that, I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier on sort of navigating how to further the development program to be locally led. And I think that's something for Australia actually to sort out in terms of our governance frameworks, our risk frameworks, so that we can be shifting more and more funds directly to local organisations. So I'd say that's definitely on Australia to sort out. I know it's on the agenda and on the minds of policymakers. Whether that happens soon is yet to be tested. But I would be watching it very closely in the next 6 to 12 months to see how that rolls out. But yeah, if I had more time in this survey, that's definitely something I'd dive into further.
I'll just be very quick. In terms of some of the principles we've put there, one of them is all about local actors, mix of things like transfers of skills and technology, but more importantly, making sure that local actors are involved in the entire lifespan of infrastructure projects. We also look at the essentially inclusion issues, gender equality, disability, social inclusion, ensuring that there's like long-term preservation of investments. So some of those things come in, but for us, it's very much at a general principle level.
Any more final comments, questions? Or we just have one here?
Thank you, Chair. This from Melissa. Has your team been thinking around the financing for infrastructure? Because as Ramona mentioned, one of the issues is local capacity. But I think beyond that, the emerging issue is financing for infrastructure. So has your team thought around how to manage that aspect of the infrastructure partner with the Pacific in terms of facilities engagement within the region?
Structured financing is the absolute focus of it. When you were saying capacity, are you thinking in terms of the skills and the labour force capacity more than anything else? Yeah, we're concerned in particular about the links between the labour mobility programs, which have lots of benefits, but then if you've got those at the same time as infrastructure build, you've got a.
So what kind of model are you looking around infrastructure financing?
So what we'd be putting out is a list of guidelines that Australian infrastructure investment should aim to comply with, whether they were defence ones, whether they were funded by ODA, whether they were more geostrategic investments, that they should at least try and comply with some of these principles. So that would be the product at the end of it.
Yes, so I still see that as more of an outcome oriented rather than financing strategy, because the real challenge in Pacific Island countries is the financing for infrastructure. You know, the way I understand, the other challenges could be dealt with, prioritizing local capacities could be dealt with. The real challenge is financing for infrastructure. And that's one of the major constraints in Pacific Island countries at the moment. They know what they want, they know what the gaps, what the gaps are, and some of the other challenges could be dealt with. But the fundamental issue is the financing for infrastructure. That's a major constraint at the moment.
I think we have 10 minutes, and I will use my position as a chair to take on the last question, and that's from the lady at the back there.
Thank you. I just got in. Janita Prasad, financial sector consultant. And I think just following from Nilesh's question, it is thoughtful to think that to try and use aid, and this is open to any of the panelists, to try and use aid to make some of these projects commercially sustainable so private sector can come in through blended finance or through any other ways is, I guess, key to some of these infrastructure projects. And the way, I guess, and Madeline, your comments will be really welcome. I guess from DFAT or, from Australian government's point of view, it feels like they're constantly doing a balancing act. So it is obviously best value for money, where they're putting money. Why are they putting it there instead of somewhere else? They need to justify it internally, monitor it for efficiency itself and results focused. And then on the other side, they have the need to experiment and address market failures and go into untested markets, which is higher risk. So I guess that balancing act makes it difficult. How do you see addressing some of these? I mean, I guess it's $1 million question, but that would be one of the challenges, I would think. And any comments on that will be welcome. Thank you.
Been very much focused on that from our side. One of the things that may come out at the same time as Australia's new international development policy is a development finance review. And that's been looking very specifically at what sort of vehicles Australia should be using. At the moment, there really is a multiplicity. There are so many different ways that Australia funds infrastructure in the region. You have things like AIFFP, Australian Infrastructure Fund for the Pacific, but then you have all sorts of other things as well, and they all work on different bases, et cetera, et cetera. So there have certainly been advocates as part of that process who've been talking about the benefit of Australia having a development finance institution, which we haven't had, and what that might look like, particularly what that can do in terms of crowding in private sector, getting blended finance, etc. Now, I have no idea whether that's what that's going to say or when that's coming out, but these have been very high on the list of things that people have been discussing. I don't know if you have any more intelligence on that, Maggie.
I don't. But yeah, it's a great question. It's $1 million question. There wasn't too much in this survey diving deep into that, I think. And we heard it more from our Australia-based experts in terms of what Australia should be funding or how we decide what to fund. The criteria that came out there was stop competing with China. So anything to do with that, actually like really focus in on where Australia has a unique value add and can assist in that area. So yeah, that was kind of all in the survey. I think it's going to be a really big challenge for Australia, because I think at a policy level and at an ideal level, they are shifting their attention. You saw it in the terms of reference for the new policy. They're looking at effective states that can sustain their own development and that sort of thing. But also when it comes to implementation, there is the giant machinery of Australia that's actually really hard to move through. So I think a lot of those changes we'll be seeing again in the next 6 to 12 months as they move into implementation and start sort of coming up against some of those barriers. So yeah, sorry, I don't have much more on that.
Thank you everyone for those questions. So finally, I would like to thank all the panel members for your great presentations, and as well as providing those great responses to the audience for all the questions and comments. So with that, let's put our hands together for the panel.
And person two.
So I was really keen to
Slides for the next session.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
just organizing the panel.
Sure. So did you say you have a new slides that you need to upload, or we
No,
just checking these ones?
Because
Sure.
they were going to just do it as more of a chat around the table, and then I'll just sort of hide here and press the slides.
Okay. Yeah, we've got a clicker as well, so you can probably use it
Oh.
too.
Good for the clicker, then I can really hide.
Yeah, so could you maybe come around and see if this is the correct slide?
Yeah.
The right one you're going to use?
So is there a, make that a little bit bigger?
Yep, sorry.
Just, yes, that looks correct.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
We'll just
Perfect.
have that here ready for you.
Okay, and yeah, I'll let them know about the clicker, because then
Sure.
it's only two of them who are using slides. They can pass it between them.
Yep. Yep.
Ah, perfect.
I'll
Cool.
just leave this on here.
Excellent. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Oh,
Good, sorry.
Yeah.
You guys taking a lot of Sorry, thank you. What about the other room? There's someone there, right?
Oh, yeah, Ashton is there.
Okay, good. Right, thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We might start this next session. Welcome again, everyone, to the 2023 Pacific Update and this afternoon's panel session. For those of you who are not aware, this panel is focused on discussing educational exchange, particularly in the Pacific region. My name is Norseru, and I'm going to be the chair for this educational exchange panel session. The purpose of, or the focus of this panel discussion session is to, again, discuss educational exchange between the Pacific Island countries and Australia, and highlights on its impacts on human capacity development and post-school education pathways for the Pacific region. We're quite fortunate that we have a list of panel experts, Australian experts and Pacific experts, and as the last session, they've set the scene quite well for this sessions, focusing on aid. And so now we'll just zoom into a particular pillar of aid, which is educational experience and scholarships. So allow me to introduce our panelists this afternoon. We have Hazel Lang. Hazel is the Assistant Director in the Central Australian Awards Scholarship Team that's based in the Development Policy Division for the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT, in Canberra. Hazel and her team in Canberra work closely with their colleagues across Australia's posts and partner countries to deliver the Australian Awards program. Hazel's 12 years working in DFAT is complemented by her early career as a lecturer, refugee researcher, and consultant in academia, NGO, and the UN. And to the far end, we have Dan Edwards. Dan is the Senior Research Director at the Australian Council for Education Research. For the past 7 years, Dan has managed the Australian Awards Global Tracer Facility, which is a DFAT funded research program, and with the objective of collecting and analyzing information from the alumni of the Australian Development Scholarship in order to develop a better understanding of the outcomes of that program. Dan has a background in educational sociology with an interest in transitions through education and focus on equity and access. So we have our Australian experts on the panel. And in the middle, we have our Pacific expert. Those of you in the scholarship and education scene in Fiji and the Pacific is familiar with Larissa Hazelman. Larissa is Fiji-based development consultant with Alinea International, a global international development consultancy. Prior to moving to consultancy, Larissa was the senior program manager for the Australian Awards program for the DFAT, based at the Australian High Commission here in Suva. Larissa had direct oversight for the implementation of the Australia Awards Fiji and the Australian Awards Pacific Scholarship Program. Larissa has a keen interest in human capital development of Pacific Islanders, which has stemmed from a decade working here at the University of the South Pacific and supporting Pacific Island students and graduates transition into the workforce. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me and welcome our panelists of Pacific and Australian experts this afternoon. Again, my name is Noah Seru. I'm an Australian Award alumni. I also studied in Australia with, at the Queensland University, so I'm one of the beneficiaries of this Australian exchange program. And welcome to all of you, the audience here at the auditorium, and those here online. Ladies and gentlemen, our topic this afternoon, as highlighted on the screen, is spotlighting international scholarships, the elephant in the Australian aid budget, examining the effectiveness of educational exchange for sustainable development and public diplomacy in the Pacific region. So as mentioned earlier, we are fortunate to have our Pacific and Australian experts to shed more light on what exactly is this topic all about. So just to guide us through this session, we've sort of organized a different format for this afternoon sessions. We'll allow each of our panelists to give their views on specific topics by responding to a few questions. And then following this, we'll have about 30 minutes of questions and answers, Q&A from the audience. So again, our topic is spotlighting international scholarships, the elephant in the Australian aid budget, examining the effectiveness of educational exchange for sustainable development and public diplomacy in the Pacific region. So we'll just dive straight into the whole discussion. We'll make this a little bit more interactive. We'll start off probably with Dan in terms of just trying to shed a bit more light in terms of that elephant in the question. What exactly do we mean by the phrase elephant in the aid budget, part of this panel's title? Very briefly, can you please explain or what is your perception of this definition? Thank you.
Thank you, Noah, and thanks for the introductions too, and hello everybody today. Good to see everyone here. We made a provocative title to try and get on a panel, really, but it was an elephant is there to be seen, and we've been working in scholarship research for a few years now, and working across development areas as well. And we think that the discussion around scholarships is something that we're not seeing as much. We don't hear it being talked about. So hence calling it the elephant in the aid budget. It's not a huge elephant, but it's a significant and worthwhile elephant to talk about. It is about a $250 million per year investment by the Australian government in the Australian wards, and Hazel will talk more about this in the next little bit. And that's about 5% of ODA that Australia spends, which is small but significant. The other significant aspect that we think about is that it's been a long-term investment over many, many years, over at least since the Colombo Plan in the 50s. So there is a lot of interest in understanding where those alumni come from and what the role of scholarships are in our development budget. We're really happy to have this panel session accepted. We really thank USP and ANU for reading through and giving us this opportunity, and we've purposefully compiled a number of people to provide different perspectives from the practitioner perspective, the researcher perspective, and the government perspective, as well as Noah agreeing to be chair as an alumni from the alumni perspective. So we hope that what we say today is useful. What we've been working on at ACR, and I'll talk about a bit later further too, is 7 years of research that we finally got to a point where we feel like we have some confidence in what we'd like to say and what we'd like to share to a panel and through a panel like this with this audience. So what we're trying to achieve today is just to do what it says up there, which is shine a spotlight on scholarships, understand scholarships from a few different perspectives here, and then also open up and to your thoughts and understandings and criticisms and interests as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for shedding that light on what we exactly mean by the elephant in the aid budget. So we understand that it's trying to bring up the role of the scholarship program in the aid budget a bit more to the forefront in terms of the whole aid program. And when we do that, we tend to start talking about really what is the big picture in all of this aid budget, or with the scholarship, if we're wanting to bring it to the forefront. So that brings me to my next question, which I'll direct to Hazel, in terms of, we tend to all talk about that big picture. Yeah. What is that big picture? And tell us about Australia's investment in Australia's exchange in the Pacific Islands and how it relates to the overall development aid and foreign policy objectives.
Thanks, Noah. Hi, everybody. Is that going to be better? So a little bit more background to Dan's excellent introduction, that DFAT administers the Australia Awards through a decentralised or a federated program architecture. So delivering through Australia's network of posts across the Indo-Pacific. Currently in 2023, working across 28 posts, everywhere from Ulaanbaatar to Jakarta, Africa still,
to here in Suva and across the Pacific. And I work in the central team in Canberra with the global policy and program architecture oversight. And so we also work with 59 posts on alumni engagement. And the PNG Alumni Association is a strong example with 5,800 members across 12 provincial chapters. So Australia Awards are international scholarships prioritising developing countries. That's clear. And they offer emerging leaders, high potential students at both undergraduate and postgraduate levels, the opportunity to do study, research and professional development in Australia and the region. So PhD, master's degrees, undergrad degrees, as well as short courses, non-degree awards. So the overall goal for the Australia Awards is for graduates, for alumni, to return home and contribute to their nation's development while building strong links with Australia. So that's our overarching goal. And Australia Awards really focuses on building human resource capacity in priority development sectors identified by partner countries. And long-term Australia Awards scholarships are based on an open, competitive and merit-based selection and equity of access. And each of these processes are managed through the posts I mentioned earlier. And Australia Awards is the Australian government's major inbound scholarships program, and it's complemented by our outgoing program, which is a newer program, the new Colombo Plan, and that's for Australian undergraduates heading out into the region. And this has been in operation since 2014. And since then, it's included 112 scholarships and over 7,500 mobility grants to the Pacific region. But we've got more work to do to increase the uptake of NCP scholarships in the Pacific. So I work in the branch in DFAT in Canberra, managing both of these programs. So that big picture, Noah, yeah, so I work at the global level, but I will come to the Pacific very quickly. But as Dan has said, it's Australia Awards or their international development scholarships, they're really a long-term investment in educational exchange. And as Dan has said, they've been a continuous feature of Australia's international engagement since the Colombo Plan of the 50s, Dan just mentioned. And they've formed an important part of our diplomatic and development footprint over those 70 years. Really important. And we estimate around 100,000 women and men have received an Australian government development scholarship with different names over the years, including that's long-term and short-term. It's an impressive figure. Australia's Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, is herself the daughter of a Colombo Plans scholar. So that's her Malaysian father. And reflecting on this, she has said, the opportunities of education provide endless potential for growth for individuals and their communities and for their countries. And some of the earliest scholarships were in the Pacific. And today, international scholarships continue to feature in almost all of our bilateral aid programs. And Dan mentioned that 5%, it's pretty steady, 5% of the ODA budget. And he mentioned also the $250 million around about that figure for this financial year we've just had. So it is a really large investment. And I'll just talk about the Australia Awards in Australia briefly. So as of the end of last month, we had 1,747 students on scholarship in Australia. That's from multiple intake rounds because of COVID mobilisation delays. And they are studying at 41 universities, 58% female, and 72 scholars receive disability support through Australia Awards entitlements. And that includes support for carers to accompany the scholar. So in this global mix, high-performing individuals from Pacific Island countries are also gaining qualifications at Australian universities. 484 students from the Pacific at the moment studying in Australia on long-term scholarships. There's another scheme, the John Allwright Fellowship Scheme, and that's ACR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, works with partner countries offering postgrad, mainly PhD scholarships. And this includes specific agricultural scholarships, support and climate resilience program. And just recently, we relaunched the Australia Awards Fellowships program, and that targets mid-career and senior officials in the region to build networks and partnerships with Australian organisations. And one example I know of is a Fijian fellow who will be visiting Australia to enhance pathology services in Fiji. And another component is on-award enrichment, professional leadership activities, which is beyond the formal degree qualification. The Women Leading and Influencing program for Pacific scholars and alumni is now in its second phase. That's a gold standard example, and that supports participants to build skills, confidence and networks to effectively lead and influence on development issues in their own context, in their own communities. And it applies a developmental leadership lens to the process of change. So that through that program and programs like that creates a unique space in the scholarship to build networks and support soft skills, such as leadership development. So Australia Awards in the Pacific, I have a table just to sort of show the global picture and then Pacific Island countries. You can see Pacific Island countries are a key focus of Australia's scholarships investment. And I think you can see a growth in Pacific scholarships in Australia over the recent period, 2016 to 2023. And Australia Awards Scholarships program is unique though in extending beyond the in Australia scholarships modalities to in the Pacific. And I'll mention briefly the two main schemes. Australia Awards in PNG is a highly visible, long-standing element of Australia's education development cooperation, aiming to build skills to contribute to PNG's economic and human development and to foster links between Australia and PNG. You're getting the gist of the twin track goal of the Australia Awards. So there are 381 Australia Awards in PNG awardees, currently studying at 12 PNG tertiary institutions. So there's been 2,600 scholarships since 2012. And these are just designed to address critical workforce gaps in health, education, and maritime transport in PNG through support for increased training opportunities for nurses, midwives, and primary and secondary school teachers. So there's scholarships at 12 partner tertiary institutions in 7 provinces and the National Capital District. The other scheme, there's a PowerPoint on this one, is the Australia Awards Pacific Scholarships, well known to all of you here. And it continues to be a really important part of regional development cooperation. And at the moment, we've got 183 awardees studying on award at Fiji National University and the University of South Pacific. And so since 2015, there have been 757 Pacific Islanders from 11 countries who've attended FNU and USP. So in fields of health, economics, law, agriculture, infrastructure, and the environment. But I mentioned though that while tertiary scholarships make up a significant component of Australia's education investment, delve into the Green Book to have a look at the statistic more closely, Australia remains the largest aid donor to Pacific education systems. Other long-standing regional education programs and partnerships to the Pacific to support Pacific priorities include, well known to all of you here, Australia Pacific Training Coalition, of course, USP over 5 decades, the Quality and Assessment Program, of course, delivered through SPC, and the Pacific Research Program. And also the PNG Oz Partnership Higher Education Initiative to support academic strengthening in PNG universities. Yeah, so just returning to this twin track aid and foreign policy objective you asked me about, Noah, and to wrap this up, yeah, Australia was very long-term investment, and it's about investing in the future, and it has that twin track strategic development and foreign policy goal, and that's to support partner countries to achieve their development goals through education and knowledge transfer. That's the development outcome. And then, of course, on the soft power side, building enduring relationships, personal, professional, institutional, and we track this through monitoring and evaluation architecture across all the various programs, and very importantly through the Global Tracer Facility. So Dan's going to talk more about the Global Tracer Facility research program set up to assess long-term outcomes, set up 7 years ago. It was a missing piece to get that deep evidence-based picture of how Australia would contribute to its strategic goal. Just to mention on the soft power side, education exchange is a central pillar of Australia's investment in people-to-people links to create a two-way bridge between our countries. And of course, Australia leverages the soft power benefits of education exchange, helping to shape a positive attitude towards Australia. And Australia Woods alumni go on to be ambassadors for Australia. Noah feeling the pressure. And building personal, professional connections on campus, off campus. And of course, Australia Awards alumni go on to be leaders in government, private sector, academia, and their communities. And of course, for Australia, highly influential alumni open doors and diplomatic access for Australia in partner countries. Just return now briefly to the soft skills side, which is a really important part of the On Award enrichment and the women leading and influencing. The Australia Awards Leadership Initiative for Pacific Women and Men, I mentioned earlier, helps to enrich the scholar experience. And what it does is bring students together to network and share experiences, boost skills and confidence to exercise developmental leadership. And WLI is a program that's very closely networked with Pacific leaders, and some of whom are themselves Australia Awards alumni. I remember in the early days of WLI, the Honourable Ralph Regan Vanu in Vanuatu. There are many examples. I'll just pop the next PowerPoint, please, Amanda. Just to mention that our former and current steering committee for WLI, you'll see, Samoan former MP, the Honourable Aimanu Alofa. She was the mother of the first phase of the program, and an ongoing supporter. And now we have Andy, you can see Executive Director of Samoa Women in Business Development, a mentor for WLI since the very beginning. We're also fortunate to have PNG's Vice Minister for International Development, the Honourable Kessi Sawang, who's a very active member of the steering committee and a mentor to many. Yes, so, and then next PowerPoint slide, please, Amanda. WLI alumni. So the new phase of WLI is as an on award enrichment and reintegration program. So alumni of our WLI program go on to make significant contributions, and you can see up there Vasiti Soko, first female director of the National Disaster Management Office, NDMO, here in Fiji, expert in geospatial science and surveying. You can see Pamela Taliman, who did her PhD at the Kirby Institute, University of New South Wales, on cervical cancer screening. and an eminent PNG medical researcher. And you'll see Tagalima up there, Lima, Samoa's first cybersecurity expert who did her master's in cybersecurity at RMIT. And at the conference, we have Jocelyn Loffman from the Ministry of Justice in Vanuatu, and I'm not sure, I think Jocelyn's not in the room at the moment, but she's going to be presenting tomorrow. The list just goes on, and the really important part of this program is the soft skills and the networks and that support that can be developed in a cohort horizontally, but also vertically between cohorts past and into the future. So I'll just say that following COVID disruptions, we're ramping up again, working closely with our partners to get a full pipeline of scholars once again. And just to mention that it's going strong, we had 23,000 applications for next year's academic year from 54 partner countries. So posts are very busy at the moment finalising selection. And I'll just mention Channel Pat, Minister for International Development in the Pacific, Pat Conroy, who was unable to make it this morning. But I'll just finish on this note to say that he was talking about Australia's international development program as one of the best tools of statecraft that can be deployed to advance our interests and values and those of our partners. And Australia's international scholarships program brings together these two arms of statecraft, people-to-people links and international development program. So I'll finish there. Thanks, Noah.
Thank you, Hazel. Thank you very much for taking us through the importance of the scholarship program and what it means in terms of the bigger picture. As an alumni, I'm quite pleased that I'm part of Australia's investment. And I saw in the statistics that you put up in 2015, there were 116. So I'm assuming I'm one of those 116. I don't know. But yeah, if you're an Australian Award alumni, I think you would have seen your number maybe up on that screen. But thank you very much for taking us through that and what it means in terms of setting up the steering committee for women and etc. And I think that you touched on the whole process of selection in terms of how the selection is going, and that probably leads me to the next question, which I'll direct to Larissa. Larissa, you bring a wealth of on-ground experience in terms of scholarships program, not only in Fiji, but the Pacific region. With your experience in engaging with counterparts across the Pacific in the scholarship space, what common practices are you seeing in how scholarships for development are being used and how individuals are selected? Can you briefly give us an insight into this whole process? Thank you.
Vinakano, and good afternoon, sorry, to you all. Hazel has given the strategic overview of the Australia Awards program. Me being a practitioner, but also a former Australia Awards, working in the Australia Awards space, but also as a Pacific Islander who has the interests of the Pacific at heart in terms of ensuring that our people can find, first of all, gainful employment, but also about making sure we get the mix right about meeting the needs of our society. With regards to, I think, at a country level, the implementation of Australia Awards or for any scholarship program, be it the National Scholarship Program or any other donor agency that is also offering scholarships in the Pacific, a key component or a key part of consideration of this process is ensuring that consultation takes place first. And this happens before any scholarship cycles commences. So again, with the example of the Australia Awards program, there's a huge internal review done annually before any scholarships are offered. The priority areas are set. Usually DFAT Australia Awards does an internal reflection. Where have the scholarships gone to? What did we do well? What can we improve on? What do we need to consider going into the next scholarship cycle? And in doing that, it then becomes the basis upon which, say, Australia goes to the partner government and says, we would like to offer scholarship for the next year, but this is what we found is working, what is not working with our program, and this is where we need you to work with us or consult us on how do we make sure that scholarship is effective for your development. And so this is it's a very consultative process. It takes place, the consultation doesn't only happen at the beginning, but it happens throughout the scholarship cycle at the point of promotions, when you go out to promote the programs in the communities, in the maritime islands, in the rural communities, ensuring that we have the buy-in of national government divisions or units. The government plays a key role in this process, but also ensuring that we also include other stakeholders, private sector, the disability people organizations, and other interest groups who have the interest of the country at heart, but also have a key role to play in the human resource or human capital development of the country. And also a key part of this consultation is ensuring that the donor agency, be it the Australia Awards, does not duplicate priority areas, or does not duplicate scholarships where other donors are also providing support to the government. And this is why government is also very, is probably one of the main stakeholders in scholarship and priority setting, because they have the eagle eye of what's happening of the development of the country, and they are talking to other donors. It would be, I think, one of the reflections I made when my time in the program was, I wish there was more donor coordination. And I think this is something we hear in other spaces as well. Everyone's doing development, but sadly, there's not enough coordination amongst the donors, or even with government and within government, around what the key priorities should be. And so this is also another area where I think the governments can leverage their position in ensuring that we get what's valuable for us and what the need is for our countries. Also key to that in terms of that consultation is it's also reporting, and a lot of times the onus is also on the donors to ensure that you're not only going there to be extractive in what you want to know, because you need to tick a box and make sure that we need to roll out our scholarship program for the following year, but also reporting back to the governments, telling them what you have done with the scholarships in the last, whether it be the last financially in the last 5 years, build a picture of what the scholarships have done for the country. And in doing so, is also to get the buy-in of the government in terms of where perhaps were the best use of these scholarships, where perhaps there were barriers to employment, because we have a lot of alumni. That has been my ex-Australia Awards hat. When they return to country, the majority gain employment because it's in the priorities set by government. But there are a handful that still don't get jobs. And these were priority areas that were made or were deemed important or relevant by government 3 years prior. So some of that still takes place. And that's why it's important that before any scholarship round is to revisit that with governments to ensure, and stakeholders, private sector, about what the barriers are, what the challenges are, so that they have a role to play in ensuring that these highly qualified individuals can return and make a contribution where necessary, where the need is. So that's the first part of that question. No, I just wanted to highlight that. The second part is related to the merit and merit-based process of scholarships. As many of us know, here in the Pacific, the Australia Awards is a highly regarded and prestigious scholarships. On average, 1,000 applications a year, and that's Fiji alone. Competitive. It is a very competitive process. 1,000 applications for a handful of scholarships across 5 to 6 priority areas, all deemed highly relevant and highly needed for the country. So how do you get the balance right? How do you get the mix right? Well, for one thing, the Australia Awards policy is clear around its gender equality, ensuring that 50% of the scholarships must go to women, girls or women, and it does that very well. I think in the last 8 years of my time in being in the Australia Awards program. We didn't have a problem with that. If anything, we were seeing that the girls were overtaking the boys in terms of the selection process. It was a matter of how do we get the boys to come up to the level, and this was purely at the undergraduate level. So that was a rethink, and that was also a conversation with the education program, and making sure that we weren't working in silos, but also feeding that information to the education program if there was something to be done in their sectors. So that was, a tick. We could do that well, and we did it well. We ensured we went out to schools, we went out into communities where girls and boys didn't have access to the technology because the application is online. It was adaptable. You can fill in a hard copy application. So really around accessibility, and merit is good because it's the easiest way to do it, but it also means that one of the criteria was academic competence. And this is really also linked to universities, the admission criteria, what they want of anyone coming through the universities. So it's also benchmarked against what the universities require of the recipients of the scholarship. In saying that, whilst we got a large number of scholarships or recipients who met merit the academic criteria, the scholarship is also about ensuring that it includes or encourages applications from women, people with a disability, and other marginalized groups. And we did well on women. Where we didn't do well was for people with a disability. And so we were told plainly to our faces a few years ago on outreach to the DPOs that the Australia Awards program is not accessible to us. It's prestigious. It's for highly high achieving candidates. Well, we don't meet the criteria. We are high achieving, but not along to the criteria that you have set. So that was a real, it was a real eye opener for us, and it was good for us to hear that, because we went back to the drawing board and thought about how can we make the scholarships while merit-based, but also to ensure that we included other diverse or other marginalized groups. And so we went through this whole process of trying to understand how we could include people with a disability. And we realized that the degree program and the postgraduate program was not good enough because it didn't apply to them, or it really was a restriction. It was exclusive of them because they never came through the normal schooling system like everybody else. They went to schools where they didn't have the same qualifying requirements as the rest of us. So we changed the approach. We looked at other programs that would make it more accessible for them. And we realized, talking to the universities, that we could do something at a lower level, but also to staircase it so that in the years to come, they would gain access to the degree level. So we put in Certificate 3 and Certificate 4 programs. The year we did that, we got a large number of applications for people with a disability. We put, I think, about 5 people on award. And key to that, I think, is in terms of balancing between merit and equity, is ensuring that we put in the right support before they start the scholarship. It has to be around what their needs are, so within the reasonable accommodation, and perhaps not putting them directly in at a degree level or a certificate level. We had a preparatory program planned around them, around literacy, numeracy, so ensuring that there was enough support mechanisms around them for them to be able to confidently take the next step, which was going into the academic program, which is very new for them, having tutors on standby to support them, so they didn't feel overwhelmed about not being able to submit assignments on time or write an assignment. So all that was quite key to the program. And I think in terms of, scholarships now being the focus on merit basis, to ensure that we take everyone along on this journey, and knowing that there are other modalities or delivery mechanisms that are in place to ensure that other marginalized groups or people with a disability can also access these scholarships without having to go through a degree and the master's or the postgraduate program. And Hazel mentioned some of those modalities that are currently part of the suite of programs that they offer, the enrichment program, the short course awards. And that's something I think that is resonating more in the Pacific, amongst the Pacific Island Australia Awards programs, is around short course awards. It's not enough Not everyone wants to go on a degree or a long-term award. You have women who would prefer to remain in their jobs and also stay home with their families, but making the scholarship accessible to them so they can do it in country rather than having to leave home and do it in Australia or any other country for that matter. And I think that flexibility around the types of delivery mechanisms that are available makes it more equitable for different groups. Also to say that in making it more equitable is also positioning lifelong learning in that, because it's not only about the degree, it's not only about the master's program, but it's also in a sense responding to the needs of the country. We've just come through COVID and everything. We've had to press the reset button. Needs have changed. No longer are they what they told us perhaps 3 years ago. But in saying that, now we have an opportunity to provide something for 2 weeks, for 3 months, for 6 months, at the discretion of, at the convenience of the applicants who have the need to be able to go and contribute to their countries, but perhaps not in the way that traditional scholarships have been developed. So this mix of modalities are a great way to ensure that you can also respond to the needs on the ground and help the countries to be able to put in immediate skills and knowledge that requires that requires it at the time. I think I've covered everything I wanted to say, Noah. I'll stop there and I'll wait for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa, for taking us through the selection process of the scholarship. I think you've highlighted a few key issues on just the whole consultation process, the need for better donor coordination and for it to be government driven, the relevance of selection, and also how your scholarship programs and Hazel has picked up on that led to a whole suite of scholarships that's available so that it's more inclusive to the Australian Awards program. So the last question I'll pose to Dan in terms of, we've all been on scholarships. I'm an alumni, and your team has been collecting a lot of evidence with your tracer studies from the alumni. So the question is, to what extent are scholarships for development meaningfully contributing to the human capital development that's raised in our question? And what are the results from the research? Or what are they saying in terms of the scholarships program? Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great to hear the perspectives from Hazel and Larissa. And so as Noah's asked, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the long-term outcomes and what we see, what we're seeing from the scholars who have been through Australia Awards and the predecessor scholarships. We know it's been a long-term global investment, but until the last few years, there hasn't really been a whole lot of solid evidence around what the alumni of these programs are doing and what their contributions to development are. We know that there are monitoring evaluation programs within countries and within country and regional programs, and these are great ways of understanding the short-term outcomes of alumni. But about 7 years ago, there was an audit by the Australian National Audit Office that suggested that DFAT maybe invest a little bit in understanding where their long-term investment was going and what was happening. So DFAT funded a research facility known as the Global Tracer Facility. Me and my colleagues at the Australian Council for Educational Research were lucky enough to have the opportunity to set that facility up and have kept running that facility for the last 7 years. The Australian Council for Educational Research, just for those who don't know, is an independent not-for-profit organisation with a research focus in education. It operates in Australia, but globally. And we look at outcomes and educational disadvantage, etc., right across the lifespan. So from early childhood right through to university and beyond. And work in the Pacific in a number of other areas too. The ECAP program in particular that Hazel was talking about is something that ACR is heavily invested in as well. I'd also just like to acknowledge Amanda Haddo, who's a member of the Global Trace Facility team and convened at this panel. Even though she's sitting over there, she is very much part of this panel. And also I know that we've got some colleagues spying on us online back home. So that's great to have them there too. But what we were asked to do was to collect some evidence and better help DFAT and others better understand the long-term outcomes of alumni. And that's beyond the anecdotal evidence and beyond the champions that we all know of, but really getting a bit more depth to the work and to the understanding of outcomes. So our remit was really around understanding long-term development contributions and also links with Australia, cooperation and partnerships, as Hayes was saying, the two main pillars of the Australia Awards program. And in fact, they're pillars, they may have been mentioned or worded differently going back, but if you go all the way back to the Colombo Plan, there's similar kind of intentions have been going through these development scholarships all the way. And often the diplomatic aspect is one that is focused on, or one that is said that's the only thing that we have any evidence on. So we were interested in testing that and seeing what we could find. The concept that we're working with here is that the actual scholarship is only the start of the journey. The scholarship investment is just a small part. It's maybe the tip of the iceberg, for want of a better metaphor. And that we really need to understand what happens after the scholarship, which is where really we think that the rubber hits the road and things begin to work. So we've been looking over the last 7 years, we've run about 40 different studies, from large-scale quantitative collections of global trace of survey data right across the world to very bespoke, specific case studies in country, in sector, with alumni and with stakeholders and with employers. We've also done other sort of data work, especially over the last few years as COVID restricted the ability to go and speak with alumni, working on things like social network analysis and more bespoke survey work, some of which I'll talk about in a minute. In terms of doing the research, there are a whole lot of challenges, and we'll talk about other challenges as well, but there are challenges to doing this kind of research. One of the biggest being finding alumni and being able to get them to respond to things and talk to them. Obviously, when you have a program that goes back 70 years, of which the majority of time there weren't emails, it makes it very hard to begin that process of picking our way back in time. As a result of that, most of our big scale data is based more on the last about 20 years of alumni rather than further back, but we have also dug very deep in country to find a number of different alumni to present their views right back from Colombo Plan recipients. So what I was going to show here in terms of the data that we've collected is really focus on the development contributions data that we have, and just give you a bit of an insight into what we've found and what we see. It's very small. It's only a small amount of what we've done, and we encourage you to have a look further back and pick through the work that we've done. But really the question is, what do we know about the long-term outcomes of alumni? And I'm looking here with some of the data we're talking about Australia Awards alumni, as in the alumni we've sort of cut the data just to be about Pacific alumni, and a lot of it is Australia Awards Pacific people going from into Australia to study. That's the straight Australia Awards, but there is also the Australia Awards Pacific Scholarships, which we ran a special survey on those alumni a couple of years ago. And I've got some data just to talk about that too, just to show the similarities between the two cohorts. So as you see up there, there's a number of ways to cut this. There's a number of ways to look at these kinds of outcomes. And we've found that looking through a sort of an impact lens has been a good tool for us to begin to pull apart some of the data and understand a little bit more about the contributions that scholarships have made to alumni and then alumni have made to development. So we've been looking through a micro, meso, macro kind of perspective, and you can see up there on the screen broadly what that means. But we know that there is obviously a personal outcome for an alumni or an alumni from a scholarship. We know that they get a degree and off they go. But that's not really what the point of the whole scholarship program is. The point is that goes further, that's just the first stone in the water that begins the ripple. So we are very interested in looking in the meso and the macro outcomes, the organisational outcomes, and then the outcomes of alumni contributing well beyond their organisation to the nation, to the region, and internationally. So I think we've got in next, if you do a couple of clicks, please, Amanda. So we looked at the Australia Awards alumni. We did a survey just towards the end of last year. This data hasn't been fully published yet, but we've cut it down by looking just at alumni from PNG in the Pacific and their outcomes and their responses to a number of specific questions that are trying to get to these three areas. And you can see that obviously almost everybody is very enthusiastic about the fact that their scholarship helped them with their own personal career. But then in there, we also find very strong suggestions, and this has been consistent across 7 years of data collection and tens of thousands of alumni that we've spoken to about other aspects. So helping, making contributions to your organisation and making contributions to your community, and then also there's very high levels of indication that the alumni are making contributions beyond their organisations and into across their nation, but also going further into the region and beyond. The next little bit of insight and evidence is through this is the Australia Awards Pacific scholars specifically that we're talking about here. We asked scholars to talk about the different sustainable development goals that they are contributing to, and we know that people are contributing to more than one. And what we found was that, at least from the evidence that we've got through the Australia Awards Pacific and through our other surveys, is that we can identify alumni that are contributing, that alumni are contributing to all 17 of these sustainable development goals. And we can find the different examples through the qualitative data that we're collecting from them. And so the next couple of slides are just using some examples of this that we've had through alumni responses. The focus of choosing these, and it is pretty easy to find these quotes, they're scattered throughout our work and throughout the surveys that we get. But so many of them are about the human capital development aspect that they are able to contribute to. So education is an obvious one where that is happening. And I guess the focus here is trying to emphasize the ripple effect. But there is also similar kind of things in some of those other, well, in most of the SDGs, but I'm just looking at the top three at the moment. But good health and well-being, as well as gender equality. And in each of the examples and each of the bits that we're pulling out, we're seeing how alumni are either using their skills and knowledge within their workplace to share and to disseminate information, or using it within broader perspectives to train up other people and then develop further in terms of things like dental schools and gender empowerment. The other thing that we wanted to highlight, again, also around what we're finding in terms of this, it's not about one person's gain, it's a wider gain, is that we've done some work in social network analysis. And we've done a few of these social network analysis surveys. This one is Kiribati alumni. We did, I think this was a couple of years ago. The point here is not necessarily to go into detail into what this map shows, except that it shows the interactions of individual alumni within that network. The point really is around speaking to the long-term, showing that the long-term investment adds up over time in terms of the networks and the way that the critical mass of alumni and the way that they continue to interact. So each of the dots here represents a person. Those people are not from the same cohort, they're from a range of cohorts across a number of years. And there are great interactions, both socially, but also in terms of networks for work, networks for connecting with Australia. It's a contribution to the story of the Australia Awards and to the story of how when done well, the scholarships can promote and push even further beyond the individual. I'll just finish with just talking about the ongoing challenges. So I know we've been telling a rosy picture, and obviously we feel like we've collected a lot of evidence, and there's some good evidence here, but we also see a lot of challenges that can be overcome, and challenges that continue to come up. And Larissa's talked about the merit and equity aspect of scholarships. Other things that we're specifically seeing in our research is that matching of skills to development needs and the pipeline issues, trying to get right what a country is going to need in a few years' time, and then get some of the funding in place. But we also know that it takes a long time for someone can't come home from doing a degree and suddenly be expected to be on task and off they go. We need to be thinking about this as being something that's further than it's 3 years to get your degree. How many years to get your experience? How many more years to really influence it? We know that takes a long time. So getting that right is very difficult in terms of selection processes. We spoke about equity and opportunity of impact. And then the other one that we see increasingly important is the improving the post-award experiences, and things like the women leading and influencing is one thing that's doing this, is harnessing the alumni, harnessing their experiences, harnessing their networks, and helping getting them working together, providing them with further training and professional development to continue to make a difference. Thanks, Noah.
Thank you, Dan, for that, and thank you for highlighting the importance of the tracer study. As an alumni, I'm probably not the best respondent to your alumni questions, but I promise to be the next time, because I know who you are and you know who I am. But thank you very much for linking that long-term development and investment to the whole bigger picture issue which Hazel raised, and just the reassurance that the post-award experiences in terms of what comes out of the tracer study. And I think we're doing very well on time, but just before we go into the Q&A section, I'll probably just pose one last question to all three of you, in terms of what do you think is missing out of the scholarship landscape? And in terms of what you think is missing, how do you think this gap can be filled? We'll probably just give Dan a breather and start with Hazel in terms of responding and work our way down. Thank you.
Thanks, Noah. Yeah, Larissa was talking about the front end of the scholarship and supporting inclusion, including disability inclusion, and the kind of challenges there at the application stage, and getting a scholarship and being successful there. I think also that we need, through the Australia Awards, to give more support to our returning alumni for their reintegration. We know there's a lot of challenges for returning alumni. There are perceptions and expectations when they go back. You know, we in the Australia Awards program kind of talk up expectations of alumni as change agents in their countries and communities, which is, you know, it's a positive thing, but I just see that, you know, more support to manage expectations and navigate challenges back home is just a really important part of the Australia Awards that we need to keep working on to kind of complement the scholars in Australia, or if it's in Australia, study experience, just supporting safe re-entry for families, communities and workplaces, noting, you know, that there are barriers. There might be unemployment, you know, lack of a job. There might be, you know, other sort of family expectations or cultural expectations or gender, you know, barriers to navigate. And we know about these challenges anecdotally, and when we chat, we hear, and through the Australia Awards alumni development impact surveys, that they're the short-term ones, not the long-term tracer work. And other M&E and Larissa would have heard much more than I have in this space. And I know that ANU and University of PNG through the WLI program did some really good research on expectations and experiences of PNG alumni on their return. That was led by Sonia Palmieri and at ANU, and Betty Levi and GJ Millie at UPNG. and they were looking at the enabling factors and the hindrances. And it was quite a balanced picture. And so on the enabling side, the research found that, they, as a result of their experiences in Australia, they do return with leadership competencies honed and, more confidence on the one hand, but then there are other sort of barriers to navigate around legitimacy, women's legitimacy in the workplace. So there's a lot to sort of think about and to support. And again, and Larissa and I were having a good chat earlier, and Larissa might add to that. Noah, I'll just say that the WLI program we've been talking about so much is it's a learning program, a learning and an adaptive kind of program. And so now the second phase is it's an on award and reintegration program. So it's really set up with intentional programs to support return and to set up networks of support and like a leaders hub and more support. But it would be nice to, would be important that we do more of that and talk to, to our programs and partners to do more in that space.
Thanks, Hazel. I think this, in one of the areas that I think the Australia Awards can improve, but also other scholarship providers and donors is really around how on immediate return when the reintegration. One thing that I saw that a lot of alumni had, but we weren't capitalizing on, is a lot of them were involved in research projects, and a lot of their research projects were based on a development issue in the countries. But when they came back, that wasn't captured or that wasn't publicized or made visible so that government, interest groups or stakeholders could take advantage of that research and use it in a way that hopefully could have been implemented for the greater good of the country. And so I was telling Hazel before we came on was, is there a way you can set up a research symposium so that these alumni can come and present to key stakeholders, but not only the Australia Awards alumni, call the ones from JICA, Quaker, all the ones, even USP and FNU, make it a regional a research symposium that other like-minded researchers who are keen in this space can also share their work and hopefully draw in those who need to be part of the conversation to make the changes. And I thought that was really a lost opportunity, and hope, Hazel, that's something you can take back to Canberra and look at doing as part of the honor award or enrichment programs. Also a great way for many of these alumni to network on return, because they lose that for the 2 to 4 years that they're away, and they have to come back to their home countries and reintegrate, but also not aware of the space. So who are the key people, or how to get a job? And so I think this would be a good segue for them coming back into country. And just my last point is around the enabling environment upon return home, is that too often we leave it to the scholarship of their qualifications to make inroads where it can, and it does do that. But for many, for a handful of scholarship, it's also about the onus being on the employers to support them in terms of making sure that they are put into positions where they can make a difference and contribute to development. And too often that's left to the donors from what I've seen, but really it's also about finding a way to be for the government, the private sector, stakeholders, and those who have an interest in these alumni to be able to utilize them. And so finding that, building that, I think, a bit stronger is one area that hasn't been done properly, and just the coordination around that, whether it's alumni take the lead and put something in place where they are the ones that are leading, not only on their own, but also bringing in alumni from other universities that can also be part of the bigger voice in ensuring that they are taking action on what really should be a national approach rather than government alone. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks. Yeah, look, just quickly, one of the things from a researcher perspective and from came out this morning, seeing things like the Pacific aid map, etc., that would be good is the bigger picture perspective on scholarships across the Pacific to understand how many there are, where they're coming from, what they're going towards. So there can be possibly that more coordinated approach to the pipeline, to thinking about the pipeline. We know that there's a whole lot around, but if we don't understand the full supply, or if the government doesn't have all the tools to understand the supply, then that can be quite difficult to make an impact across the board. There's no use in everybody having their favourite spot to put all their scholarships into one basket, for want of a better word. So that was pretty much where I was going. Now I think we have some research coming up to try and do that, to try and better understand that coming too. So that's a bit of a Dorothy Dixer for myself.
Right. Thank you very much, Hazel, Larissa, and Dan, for your insights in terms of the whole Australian Awards program. We'll now dive into the Q&A session. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, please raise your hand. And we've got volunteers going around. Just introduce yourself and pose your question to the group or the individual person. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, Sadhna Sen from Dev Policy. On that last point about publishing researchers' work, you might want to speak to Ryan Edwards from Dev Policy. He's the deputy director. He did have a series going where we were publishing PhD researchers who they're asked to submit, and then their writing is then weighed with the others. And the terrible thing last year was, and I mean, I had an issue with it, and I said, you know, how come you don't have any Pacific writers in this group of PhD awardees? And his response was, they're you know, compared to the others, they were not up to scratch. So that was the other issue. I mean, Dev Policy publishes a lot of research, but it does have standards, and they expect Pacific writers to, and particularly if you've been educated in Australia, to be of the same standard as other students who submit to Dev Policy. But, you know, they do also have a good set of editors. So you may want to sort of talk to Ryan about how to get more Pacific writers published. The other question, and I hope this doesn't become too much of a comment, but I don't know if you were here this morning when the finance minister spoke, because he spoke about the lack of capacity in terms of getting right people to be able to do many jobs within the Ministry of Finance. And two sessions this morning spoke about capacity within DFED to do development well. And in both the sessions, and I didn't get a chance to say anything, was, you know, if you're going to be talking about building capacity within DFED to do effective development, what about the capacity within? And you're at the same time talking about localization. So what about the capacity within the locals to be able to do development effectively? Because the way we've interpreted the performance reviews of DFED's development programs across the Pacific, you know, they're less than satisfactory according to DFED's own reviews. So you want to be able to sort of say, okay, right, you've got a whole bunch of people going on scholarships. I'm an alumni from ANU, but I wasn't lucky enough to get a DFED scholarship. I paid my own way by eating noodles. But you know, I mean, you want to be able to question then, you know, I mean, how well do you vet the scholarship recipients that you send out, who then come back and work in the development sector, and then you have development outcomes that's less than satisfactory. And as somebody who lives in the Pacific and who would like to see the benefits of, you know, the very generous donor dollars that comes our way, and yet, you know, you live with terrible poverty. You live with people who can't get basic education, can't get basic needs. You know, you wonder, you know, what the point is of having this really well-educated, really well-waged development workers when the work that they do on the ground really makes no difference to ordinary lives. Sorry.
Thank you.
There's a bit of a disconnect somewhere.
And is there any response from the team? I suppose in terms of like the tracer study, I think the amount of level that work that goes into community work, yeah, etc. Maybe Dan, you'd like to respond to a bit of that?
Well, I don't have a really good response, but I had exactly the same thoughts this morning, sitting in those panels and thinking, oh yeah, how does that relate? If there isn't capacity, if the minister isn't seeing capacity within his own department, what does that mean for the role of well, obviously I'm thinking through a scholarships lens, but the role of scholarships, I don't have an answer. I think it's a really good question. I think it's something that needs to be continually pushed around that. I think one of the things, and again, it's not about just supporting one group of people, but is that idea of the returning from award and supplementary training and being able to keep the professional development going and keep other opportunities going, so that those people in those positions who are coming through that stream, for want of a better word, are better equipped when they arrive home, are better equipped to make that difference. I think it's a really good point, though. And same question.
Yeah,
thank you.
Sorry,
just to add on, thank you, Sarna, for those insights. I also saw, like, from the Australia Awards, we had a lot of students or alumni who were in that position. And just my reflection, and this is Fiji specific, is also about the importance that our stakeholders on the ground give to returning alumni, or even those who come out of our national universities, is how do you build that investment when they come out? Because the investment also has to be on the part of the employer. And too often they take this view that because you have a qualification, you hit the ground running. There's no support, there's nothing put around them to support them. The other thing is I wanted to say is there needs to be a mindset change amongst employers. They want the skill, they want the knowledge now, but they haven't built a pipeline. They didn't start 3-5 years ago. And for Fiji, for example, we used to have a human resource development plan. Whenever there was a national development plan, a byproduct of that was the human resource development plan. In the last 16 years, we've lost that. So now you have everyone doing their human resource development prioritization in silos. No one's coordinating that space. And so you end up now with a mismatch of supply and demand, where now you have the bus drivers association saying we need more mechanics, we need bus drivers, etc. But where was the planning to ensure that we had the pipeline full to be able to address all the gaps? And I think personally for me, it's always been a thing with me it's been one of the things is we are not paying attention to what we need. We are not proactive in terms of how to address the skill set. And Thursday would be interesting to hear about the labor mobility scheme. But again, I think it really need to take a localized approach to how we can address these issues on our own, because a lot of it is at our discretion and we can do this together, knowing where the loopholes are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan and Larissa. I think there's a question, the gentleman, and then Ariella.
Firstly, I'd just like to commend all of the panelists for your presentations, the brief presentations recently. My question is focused on. My question is focused on a scholarship that DFED used to offer before, Pacific Endeavor. I think the last year that it was around was 2015 or 16. And then just recently you've introduced the Women in Leadership. And I thought Pacific Endeavor was a more gender neutral scholarship, because men also could apply to that leadership program. And please correct me if I'm wrong, to the ladies, the current Australian Awards, candidates who apply who already have a master's, they will not be allowed to be, are they eligible to apply for the Australia Awards who want to do a PhD program?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. The first question, the Pacific Endeavor, what were the shortfalls? If anyone here would know the reason why you guys have removed it, and what were the shortfalls that caused DFED to restrategize, or because I thought it was a really great leadership Pacific Leadership Scholarship. And for those who have an existing master's want to do a PhD, that's my second part of my question. Australian Awards does not necessarily allow those who already hold a current master's. Is that the case? Could you correct me if I'm wrong? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll answer that given my knowledge of the program. Yes, if you have a master's and you can't apply for an equal, the same level qualification, so you can't apply for another master's. It is country specific, so some countries offer PhDs and others don't. Fiji is one of those countries that don't offer PhD scholarships. But in saying that, a lot of the Australian government funding is also put into Australian institutions. And that's where the access is for us as Pacific Islanders, is applying for those scholarships. We have quite a few students from my knowledge at ANU, at the University of Adelaide, and there are a few other universities. So my advice to, and this is a question that we also get asked, is apply to the institutions. They have the funding to be able to, for you to qualify for a PhD scholarship, but not on the Australia Award Scholarship. To your one on the Endeavour Award, I'm not familiar with it. I'll hand over to Hazel. She might have some ideas about that.
Thanks for your comment on Endeavour. My corporate knowledge is not extending to a good memory of, adequate memory of Pacific Endeavour. I think, was it two-way? It might have even been a two-way scholarship program. Dan, can you remember? And I know it was very well regarded, and I don't, sometimes programs are cut for different kinds of reasons in the political economy of a department or a bureaucracy or a government. But at the moment we are looking, having reintroduced the fellowships program, which of course is anything from a couple of weeks to, gosh, several months, serious kind of educational exchange or professional exchange for kind of mid-career and senior professionals. That's the good thing, is that has now been reinstated and now it's round 18. So we were able to revisit that decision. That cut was one of those things that happens in a bureaucracy, the political economy of a bureaucracy, cutting, making choices and decisions around funding. Good thing is fellowships is back and very well subscribed to. It's about $10 million in this new phase, but we're opening another round. So I will take back your point about Pacific Endeavour and have a real look at that and raise that certainly with my bosses. I know I'm happy reputation, but yeah, I just can't draw enough corporate knowledge.
Would you like me to come in on it a little bit? So I was a little involved at that point and I hosted some people through the program. So I've seen it the other direction. For Indo-Pacific, for the Endeavour ones, I think they were precisely what fellowships is now doing. So they were mid-career. It was, I think, something like about 2 weeks to 3 months, and an organisation in Australia could put in and host a person for that period. And so I did that for people during that period. I thought it was very successful. So I agree. I think it was a real shame it was cut. From the outside, and an official couldn't possibly comment on this, I think it was just cut through the, political expedience time, where we had governments who said that aid is a nice to have, it's not a thing we have to do. We need to find some budget savings and we'll take $1 billion off the program. But as I say, an official isn't going to say any of that. So thanks.
Thank you. I'm an alumni as well, but so long ago it was under a different name. AusAid Scholarship was. My very quick question is, your modalities and your enrichment program. I'm just wondering, what's the possibility of the Australian government considering taking some of our students, and they sit in Canberra. I speak from having watched your Colombo people come in and your AWID people come in, and they sit in crop agencies and UN agencies,
and the professional development, I don't know if you can even put a value on it. So I'm just wondering if, in terms of scholarship, it's one way of, really contributing practically, particularly if a student is born and grown up in Pacific Island countries. Just sitting for a year in Canberra or Wellington would just, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a twinning kind of question that probably relate to Hazel. Is that something that's worth considering in terms of the future of the scholarships? Well,
No, thank you for that. We're having a planning day on Monday, so I will take that to the planning day. No, I think that's that's a really great idea. That sort of two-way exchange, and we want to do more of that two-way exchange as we rebuild. Now that the travel restrictions have lifted and that kind of thing, and we're really revitalizing scholarships and fellowship, including short course, non-degree opportunities. But yeah, so I think even a fellowships modality might work for that kind of experience of being hosted, because with the fellowships, it's about being hosted by an Australian host organisation, but partnering with a partner country organisation. So it's about the organisation to organisation sort of linkages. So watch the fellowship space, but I'm listening to all you're saying, and I'll take it back and share those ideas. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Dan.
Oh, Dan.
Yeah, just one really quick comment, because one of the things that we've seen in Australian universities more recently is work integrated learning being built into degrees, and we also, the other thing that we know about from the research that we've done is that the alumni who have had that kind of opportunity while they're in Australia are significantly by a large margin more likely to then continue partnerships when they come back home. The ones who don't get that opportunity almost never have a partnership that follows on. So both ways, yeah, that's.
The gentleman in the front.
Thank you. My name is Sushil Kumar, and I'm Professor of Physics and Director of Research. I'm happy to say that I have been involved with the administration of one of the Australian award scheme called SAR USP scheme since 2000, which was started in 2000. Which started in 2008 and it is still continuing. We have graduated approximately 150 students with master's degree, and I think 6 or 7 PhD as well. And all of them are in academia, either they are in the different government sectors and so on. And I think they are contributing greatly to the capacity of the region. If I look at the data back of 2008, we were able to award 16 scholarships. Okay. Over the years, the cost of the scholarships have gone up. That is 2018, about 16 years. Individual scholarships, but the amount of total scholarship given by the DFAT or by Australia remains same. So right now, I think we are only able to offer 6 or 7 scholarships. So what I think what the region needs the acceleration of the capacity building rather than a constant run or rather than a decline run. So therefore, my request to you is let me make a request that that please do something so that at least the number remains constant. You should go for that the 16 scholarships, you will be able to offer 16. That means we have to look at the amount every year given to the scholarship. Obviously, the cost and scholarships have been increasing. And I think the COVID has gone. We know that there was a global economic problems. I think if you guys can think seriously, accelerating down now the capacity building, increasing those scholarships, I think it will be much more helpful. That's one point. The second point is I knew that many of my colleagues even have used the Pacific Endeavour Scholarship. They have gone to Australia, they have been trained, and they have come back and they are serving. All of a sudden, I have heard, I know that there may be some genuine reasons for that. I think this scheme, which was great and supporting the staff, actually, I think it was open only for even for the staff, actually, which has helped quite a lot for the capacity building for the staff who are in the workforce. If this could please be retained, I think the results and then the outcomes and the feedback of that scheme were really good. The second thing, which I think third thing, which if the DFAT or the OSET can think of, I think the capacity building should start from a primary level. The level is where the students start from the primary schools and high schools. And those our colleges, our schools and primary schools have got the limitations of the space, limitations of the labs, the limitations of the teaching staff. So I think if OSET can think, means I will say this award can think supporting the people from the baseline, I think this will be really grateful. But overall, I think for these schemes, we need to accelerate it. We need to accelerate the awards. We need to look at the bottom line as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. I'm sure Hazel is taking notes vigorously in terms of the Pacific Endeavour, which has been raised in this forum twice, and the need for how excellent it's been, and the funding for towards the institutions remaining the same, although the cost has risen in terms of the cost for tuition and etc. I think this has all been taken by our panelists, and thank you for those comments. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we have come to the close of our session, or the time. It's 5 o'clock. I'd like to thank our panelists and Hazel, Larissa, and Dan for your time to come and explain a bit more of this elephant that we have in the aid budget and giving a bit more light on the scholarships program. So please join me in thanking all our panelists. And just before we all depart the room, I've just been told to make an announcement. There's a side event at 5 o'clock to 5:45 at video conference room 2. And this will be a panel discussion on the Samoa pathway. So if you're interested in hearing a bit more on the Samoa pathway, there'll be a video, it'll be held at the video conference room 2. I think our volunteers will be able to show us where video conference room 2 is, and that's happening right about now till 5:45. So thank you again.